Hargraves spends a little bit of time discussing binge watching, and binge watching is a relatively new term in the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years. But I think I suspect it's a term you're probably largely familiar with. When we think about what shows are commonly associated with binge watching, we think of shows like The Americans, Arrested Development, Stranger Things, House of Cards, A Handmaid's Tale. These are often shows that are on streaming platforms where one could binge, watch an entire season or multiple episodes in a single sitting or over a short period of time. That's largely available because of streaming services and not necessarily network TV. Though with the addition of the DVR, one could, in theory, record a bunch of episodes of a single season and then sit down and watch them at once. So it is also possible to binge network television. Uh, Binging is often associated with critically acclaimed dramas. Uh, when Hargrave says serialized, it means it carries over from one episode to the next. So the idea that almost every episode ends with some sort of cliffhanger leading you to want to watch the next episode. Binge watching is not aimless viewing. Binge watching is a sort of conscious decision. One doesn't usually surf and land on something that you're going to binge. Um, the fact that shows are quote unquote bingeable is a sign of both their storytelling value and their financial value. That audiences anticipate and then sit and binge these particular shows makes them more valuable. It's a very similar practice to what we think of as fandom. So people that have seen every episode of Star Trek, or people that are very into comic books. So that complete investment in a show is demonstrated by some people's practices of binge watching. In terms of binge watching, it is what Hargrave says is self-aware practice. We kind of know what we're doing when we sit down and binge. Uh, Reality TV in general is seen as more difficult to binge watch, or at least in the framework that Hargraves is thinking of. However, I do think that people binge watch reality TV as much as other more critically acclaimed shows. One could imagine binge watching The Housewives, or binge watching Vanderpump Rules, or any number of other shows. The criticism is that reality TV lacks narrative complexity. They're not the shows aren't the shows are limited in access in terms of being able to get to them. They're too simplistic, too shallow, and too ubiquitous to qualify in the binge watching category. That For Hargraves, binging on television and being addicted to television are kind of part of the same thing. Um, so that even though someone binging on a critically acclaimed show would not probably see themselves as addicted to television, they may well be. So they're not mutually exclusive. Lost would be another example where one could go through and binge now. My wife was a huge fan of Lost, and I didn't watch it with her when it was on the air. And we've subsequently gone back and started, but it's just daunting to see how much there is to get through. So I think we got through a season, and she was disappointed that I wasn't sort of eagerly anticipating binging the next season. I think the first season had like 18-hour-long episodes, and it just seems so daunting to have to get through whatever it is, 7 or 8 seasons of this show. Um, for Hargraves, addiction is a useful framework for studying how we watch television. Um, Television itself is often framed as feminized, domesticated, and largely unhealthy. Binging would be one of those unhealthy behaviors that critics would probably point to. Um, and addiction to television is often theorized around television's bad effects on viewers, the damage that television does. Uh, Even if you're binging something that's critically acclaimed, the idea that you're sitting and watching that much television in a single sitting or in a limited number of sittings, uh, critics will often say is unhealthy. It's unhealthy in terms of the screen time. It's unhealthy in terms of the lack of movement. So in that sense, addiction to television is often framed as a negative. The clip you're about to watch is a CNN story on binging that I found that I think is really appropriate for this argument.